Stop. This new video.
Jason sat at his desk, eyes flickering between the open document on his laptop and the flashing notifications on his phone. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but instead of typing the next sentence, he found himself drifting to his favorite social media feed. Just 5 minutes, he thought to himself, knowing full well that those 5 minutes would soon stretch into an hour of wasted time. Every time he tried to focus, the distractions felt like an endless river, pulling him away from what he knew he should be doing. It wasn't that Jason didn't want to get his work done. He was passionate about the project he was working on, a marketing proposal for a client who had a vision similar to his. But the moment his attention wavered, he was lost in a whirlwind of distractions. The ping of a new text message, the temptation to check his email, or the urge to look up random facts online. And before he knew it, hours would pass, leaving him with a sense of frustration and guilt. Why is it so hard to focus? Jason muttered to himself as he watched another hour slip away. He stared at the blinking cursor on his screen, feeling like the weight of the task ahead was slowly crushing him. His friend, Lucas, had always seemed to have the opposite problem. Lucas was the kind of person who could sit down and work for hours without even glancing at his phone. Jason had often envied his ability to stay laser-focused, especially when he knew his own attention span seemed to be constantly under siege. Frustrated, Jason leaned back in his chair, looking out the window. The day was beautiful, the sun casting golden light over the city below. The world outside was full of distractions too. Yet it seemed, somehow, much easier to be focused when the task was something simple or enjoyable. Jason had no problem focusing on a book, a movie, or a game, but when it came to work, that was when the real battle began. He shook his head, trying to shake off the negative thoughts. There had to be a way to break this cycle of procrastination. The idea of struggling with focus had been an issue for him for years. In school, he was always the one to start assignments late, writing papers in a mad rush the night before they were due. Even as an adult, that habit hadn't really changed. Why can't I just sit down and get things done? Jason muttered again, the question echoing in his mind. But as he stared at the task before him, something strange happened. Instead of jumping from one distraction to the next, he paused. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Maybe, just maybe, the solution wasn't just about fighting distractions. Maybe it was about understanding why they were so powerful and finding a way to work with them, rather than against them. Over the next few days, Jason began his quest to understand why his mind constantly drifted and how he could finally regain control. He started by reading about focus, productivity, and why people are so prone to distraction in the modern age. One article explained that our brains are not designed for constant multitasking. With the rise of technology and the constant bombardment of information, it became easier for people to divide their attention across multiple tasks, but it wasn't necessarily productive. Instead, it caused cognitive overload. Jason found this idea fascinating. The constant influx of notifications, messages, and emails created a sense of urgency, a false sense of needing to be always on. Another source suggested the importance of creating a routine. Jason had always been a night owl, doing his best work when the world was quiet, but he also recognized that this wasn't always the most efficient approach. Maybe his body wasn't wired to be productive at odd hours. And so, Jason decided to test something new. Instead of continuing with his usual habits of waiting until the last minute or working in bursts of distracted productivity, he committed to creating a more structured day. He would designate a set time for work, a time for rest, and make space for activities that energized him. It sounded simple, but Jason was determined to give it a try. To start, he decided to break his work into smaller, more manageable chunks. No more sitting for hours trying to power through everything at once. Instead, Jason would set a timer for 25 minutes of focused work, followed by a 5-minute break. This method, known as the Pomodoro technique, was said to help people stay focused by creating short bursts of productivity, followed by regular intervals of rest. At first, it felt awkward. Jason was used to long, uninterrupted hours of work, and the idea of taking breaks so frequently seemed like it would only slow him down. But after the first few Pomodoros, he started noticing something unusual. When he worked in smaller, more concentrated bursts, he actually got more done than when he tried to force himself into marathon sessions. The short, Timed intervals helped him to push past distractions, giving his brain a chance to reset during the breaks. He found that he was able to focus more deeply on the task at hand, and the feelings of frustration and guilt started to fade away. But there was still more to discover. While the Pomodoro technique was a good start, Jason needed to address the root cause of his distractions: the constant pull of his phone, the urge to check social media, and the endless web of online distractions. Jason decided to try a more drastic approach. He started by turning off notifications on his phone, something he had never fully committed to before. No more pings from emails, social media updates, or news alerts. He also installed apps on his phone that would block access to distracting websites during his work sessions. The first few days were tough. Every time his phone buzzed on the desk, Jason had to fight the instinct to check it. It felt unnatural, almost like a withdrawal, but he stuck with it. Slowly, his mind began to adjust. He noticed that he could sit for longer periods without feeling the urge to check his phone or jump to a new task. But Jason realized that it wasn't just his phone causing distractions. His environment itself had to be optimized for focus. His workspace, cluttered with papers, books, and various gadgets, was contributing to his sense of overwhelm. Determined to take control, Jason spent an entire afternoon cleaning and reorganizing his desk. He removed unnecessary items, made sure his workspace was well lit, and even added a few plants to make the space more inviting. The goal was simple: create a space where he could work without distractions. When he returned to work the next day, the transformation was evident. His clean, organized space made a huge difference in his ability to focus. The mental clutter that often accompanied a messy desk was gone, and he felt a renewed sense of clarity. Despite these changes, Jason knew that the battle wasn't over. He still had to stay vigilant. The world around him was filled with distractions, and staying focused required constant effort. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was making progress. Jason had made significant strides in his battle with distractions, but even with all his external adjustments, setting timers, cleaning his workspace, blocking distracting apps, there was still one enemy he hadn't fully confronted: his own mind. It was easy to get lost in the physical changes, the things he could control on the outside. But what about the internal struggle? The thoughts that drifted in and out of his head, the nagging sense of boredom or resistance whenever he tried to focus. No amount of organizing or limiting distractions could fully eliminate that internal battle. One evening, after a productive day, Jason found himself staring at the blank screen in front of him, trying to write the opening paragraph of an email. His thoughts kept wandering, and his mind filled with questions like, is this the right approach? Or what if the client doesn't like it? That's when he realized that he was avoiding the work, not because it was hard, but because it felt uncertain. The fear of making a mistake or not living up to expectations had become a powerful distraction in itself. He took a deep breath. This was the core of his issue. It wasn't that he was incapable of focusing. It was the fear of failure that often paralyzed him. He started to recognize a pattern in his past behaviors. Whenever something felt too challenging or uncertain, he'd default to distractions, whether it was scrolling through his phone, diving into unnecessary tasks, or procrastinating until the last minute. This was a difficult realization. For a long time, Jason had thought of distractions as external forces, like his phone or social media. But now, he saw that the root of his struggles was an internal conflict. The fear of judgment, the desire for perfection, and the pressure to be flawless all contributed to his inability to focus. Jason needed a new approach, one that didn't just involve managing distractions, but also addressed the mental barriers that were holding him back. He began looking into mindfulness techniques, hoping they could help him quiet the mental noise and improve his ability to focus. One method he stumbled upon was the practice of mindful awareness. It was simple but profound. Rather than fighting his distracting thoughts, he could observe them without judgment and gently guide his attention back to the task at hand. It sounded too simple to be effective, but Jason decided to give it a try. The next morning, before diving into his work, Jason spent 5 minutes meditating. He sat in a comfortable chair, closed his eyes, and focused on his breath. The thoughts came about the project, his to-do list, his worries, but instead of reacting to them, he acknowledged each thought as it arose and let it drift away like a cloud. He then gently returned his focus to his breath. At first, it felt awkward. His mind constantly tried to race ahead, reminding him of everything he had to do. But over time, he began to notice something. He was able to detach from the thoughts that used to pull him away from his work. He could focus on the present moment without being consumed by worry or distraction. When Jason sat down at his desk to work after his meditation session, he found that he was more present. The fear of failure still lingered, but it no longer had the same power over him. Instead of judging himself for being distracted or feeling overwhelmed, he learned to approach each task with a sense of curiosity, as if it were an experiment rather than a life-or-death mission. With each passing day, Jason's ability to stay focused grew stronger. He had started to recognize that productivity wasn't about eliminating distractions entirely. It was about learning to respond to them with more awareness and intentionality. The distractions would always be there. It was his ability to choose how he engaged with them that mattered. Jason also started setting specific goals for each day. Rather than trying to get everything done at once, he prioritized the most important tasks and broke them into smaller, manageable pieces. He knew that trying to tackle everything at once would only overwhelm him, so he decided to focus on one thing at a time. But there was another shift in Jason's mindset that made all the difference. Instead of viewing work as something to get through, something to endure, he began to see it as an opportunity for growth. He reminded himself that the challenges he faced in staying focused weren't roadblocks, but stepping stones. Every time he returned to the task after a distraction, he was building mental resilience. The real breakthrough came one afternoon when Jason sat down to write a detailed report for a client. He had just finished his second Pomodoro session, and for the first time in a long while, he realized that he was deeply immersed in the work. Time had passed without him even noticing it. There had been no inner resistance, no urge to check his phone, just a quiet, steady focus. It wasn't that distractions had disappeared, it was that Jason had learned how to navigate them. He had developed strategies to deal with them when they arose and had embraced the idea that setbacks were part of the process. There were still moments when he faltered, when he felt the familiar tug of distractions, but now he knew what to do. Months passed, and Jason's life began to transform. His productivity improved, not because he had eliminated distractions, but because he had developed a new relationship with them. He no longer feared distractions or saw them as something that made him a failure. Instead, they were simply part of the journey, challenges to be met with patience and self-compassion. In the midst of his newfound focus, Jason found joy in his work again. He no longer resented the tasks that had once felt burdensome. Each project, whether big or small, became a chance to practice and refine his ability to stay present. He also realized that focus wasn't just about work, it applied to every area of his life. When he spent time with friends, he put away his phone and gave them his full attention. When he cooked dinner or exercised, he was fully present in those moments, savoring each experience. One evening, as Jason sat down to finish a report for a client, he smiled. The battle with distractions wasn't over, but he had learned the tools and mindset to win it. Focus had become his ally, not his enemy. And with that, he felt more at peace than he had in a long time. Jason had come a long way since the days when distractions ruled his life. He was no longer constantly battling his attention. Instead, he had developed a sense of mastery over his mind, one that allowed him to choose where to place his focus and when to let go. It wasn't about achieving perfection, but rather creating a sustainable and balanced relationship with work, distractions, and his own mental processes. Jason knew that life would always present interruptions, unexpected calls, new emails, or the occasional moment of boredom. But instead of reacting to these distractions with frustration or guilt, he had learned how to navigate them with ease. One key lesson Jason had learned was the importance of self-compassion. He no longer saw every distraction as a failure or a sign of weakness. If his mind wandered, he simply observed it, acknowledged it, and returned his attention to what mattered. Over time, this shifted his mindset. Distractions were no longer a reason to be hard on himself. They were a natural part of the human experience, and learning how to manage them was the real challenge. Jason had also learned to embrace the concept of rest. He realized that his mind needed time to recharge, just as much as it needed time to focus. For the first time, he didn't feel guilty about taking breaks. He scheduled time to step away from his work, to relax, to stretch his legs, and to engage in activities that brought him joy. These moments of rest weren't interruptions. They were part of the cycle of productivity. Without them, his focus would begin to fade. He found himself spending weekends unplugging from the digital world entirely. He would read a book for hours, take long walks in the park, or cook meals with friends. These breaks weren't just about getting away from work. They were about nourishing his mind and soul. It was in these moments of rest that his creative ideas often flourished, giving him the energy and clarity to dive back into his projects with renewed enthusiasm. But even as Jason's work habits improved, the world continued to evolve. New technologies, new ways of working, and new distractions emerged. The digital landscape was constantly changing, and he knew he would need to stay vigilant. One afternoon, as Jason sat in a coffee shop, working on a new project, he felt a quiet sense of gratitude. It had taken time and effort, but he had finally found his rhythm. His focus wasn't perfect, but it was consistent. He could now move through his day with a sense of calm and direction, even when things felt chaotic. His experience had taught him that focus wasn't something you achieve once and then forget. It was a skill that needed continual practice, refinement, and adaptation. Jason understood that, just as his work and goals changed over time, his ability to stay focused would need to evolve too. It was the small, daily practices that mattered the most, the routines, the mindful moments, the way he could pause and breathe when distractions arose. These practices didn't just make Jason more productive, they made him more present in his life, in every moment. As he finished up his work for the day, Jason reflected on his journey. The battle against distractions hadn't been about perfecting the art of focus. It had been about learning to dance with distractions without losing his way. Life would always be filled with moments that could pull him off track, but with the tools he had gained, he knew how to steer himself back on course. And that, in the end, was the true key to focus. Not perfection, but persistence. Not avoidance, but acceptance. A quiet commitment to show up for each task, each moment, with intention and clarity. Years later, Jason stood in front of a crowd at a seminar, sharing his journey with others. He had become an advocate for mindfulness and focus, teaching others how to manage their distractions and create more intentional lives. He spoke about the struggles he had faced, about the countless hours wasted, the anxiety of unmet expectations, and the frustration of never feeling good enough. But as he shared his story, Jason smiled. He had come to realize that the journey of focus wasn't about avoiding distractions at all costs. It was about learning how to work with them, how to accept them as part of the human experience. It was about staying present, no matter what the world threw at him. Jason's journey had taken him far, and while he knew he would continue to face challenges, he also knew he was better equipped to handle them. He had learned how to focus, not by fighting distractions, but by embracing the full experience of life, with all its ups and downs. And in the end, that was the most important lesson of all.